Welcome to our deep dive. And wow, have you guys given us some stuff to dig into today?
Yeah, some really interesting material you've sent in.
Medjugorje, right.
Uh-huh.
We've got the Radio Maria document laying out like where the Vatican stands, a YouTube video of the press conference about it, and even like Cardinal Fernandez's own notes.
Wow.
So like what's the plan? What are we going to do with all of this? I guess our deep dive mission is to, figure out what's really going on and why this whole thing is so captivating and honestly kind of controversial, right?
It really is. I mean, just to start with, it's been going on for so long, over 4 decades.
43 years, actually.
Wow.
It all started back in 1981, 6 kids saying they were seeing the Virgin Mary. I think that's the part that always gets me, like how long this has been going on.
Yeah, it's not just a flash in the pan, it's persistent.
Totally. And even back then, the local bishop, Pavel Janich, he didn't necessarily believe in the apparitions, but he believed the kids.
So, he trusted them, but not what they were claiming to see.
Exactly. Right from the start, there's this tension, like, do you believe the people or do you believe what they're saying, they're seeing? It's so interesting.
And that tension has been there the whole time. I mean, the church has investigated this thing multiple times. The Yugoslav bishops looked into it, and then, of course, the Ruini Commission under Pope Benedict.
But the big thing now is what the Vatican recently decided.
Yeah, the Nihil Obstat.
Right. That's the Latin term everyone's talking about. But for those of us who don't speak church Latin on the daily, what does that actually mean?
Well, in simple terms, it means the Vatican's basically saying, okay, go ahead. They're not stopping pilgrimages, and they're allowing public devotion to Mary, Queen of Peace, at Medjugorje.
So not quite saying yes to the apparitions themselves, but definitely not saying no to people going there and praying.
Exactly. And it seems like they're really focusing on the positive stuff that's come out of it.
The spiritual fruits, right. That's what they call it in the document.
Uh-huh. The document talks about, all the good things people have experienced, conversions, renewed faith, even people choosing to become priests or nuns because of their experience.
I was reading about that, the number of people who've had these positive changes. It's wild. It's not just a few people. It's like millions.
And that's the thing. A lot of these people, they didn't even meet the visionaries, the ones who claim to see Mary. It's like the place itself has this impact.
Almost like there's something about Medjugorje that fosters this kind of growth, regardless of whether you believe in the apparitions or not.
Right, and there's that press conference video you sent.
Oh, yeah.
Andrea Tornielli, he's in that. And he talks about feeling overwhelmed by how much everyone was praying. He heard stories about forgiveness and reconciliation that just blew him away.
So powerful. Even if you leave the whole supernatural question aside, it seems like there's something special about that place.
Yeah.
But what about the messages, like the stuff the visionaries say they're receiving?
Well, on the surface, they seem pretty straightforward. Peace, turning back to God, prayer, fighting evil, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, simple language.
Very simple, almost childlike.
Right.
But when you look closer, there are some things that, well, they don't quite line up, theologically speaking.
Like what?
There are messages about, the souls in purgatory being joyful. And then there are messages where Mary says she can't just hand out God's grace directly.
Those are kind of weird. Do you have, like, an example what one of these messages actually said?
One that comes to mind is from November 2nd, 2017. It says, "My son, one and triune, loves you." Now, at first glance, it seems innocent enough.
Yeah.
But it gets tricky when you talk about the Trinity. That's like Catholicism 101, right? The God is one being, but in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Sometimes in mystical writings, you see people kind of struggling to explain this in words, right?
Right.
But this phrasing, "my son, one and triune," it could be misinterpreted pretty easily, especially by someone who isn't deep into theology.
I see what you mean. That could be a problem. But in those notes you mentioned from Cardinal Fernandez, he addresses this kind of stuff.
Yeah, he does. He says you can find similar language in what some saints have written.
Like maybe they're just trying to describe something that's hard to put into words.
Right, exactly. He's saying, look at the core message. Don't get hung up on the exact phrasing. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say.
So we've got these messages that might not always be perfect, theologically speaking, but then we have all these people saying their lives were changed for the better because of Medjugorje. How do we reconcile those two things?
No, that's where it gets really interesting, right? It's not a simple situation. It makes you think about how we approach things that are, well, kind of messy, things that don't fit neatly into categories.
Maybe that messiness is part of what makes it so compelling.
Maybe it's even necessary. Medjugorje forces you to deal with this stuff, to grapple with the fact that faith and real life, they're not always tidy and predictable.
And a huge part of that real-life impact is the fact that people are, like, genuinely changing.
Absolutely. Both that Radio Maria document and Cardinal Fernandez, they both highlight that so many people are reporting positive changes after going to Medjugorje.
Like, not just feeling good for a day or two, but actual life changes.
Right. Returning to the church, becoming more devout, even deciding to dedicate their lives to God. Those kinds of changes.
It makes me think, you know how sometimes we want concrete proofs, hard evidence when it comes to faith?
Yeah.
But maybe sometimes the most powerful proof is seeing how people's lives are actually transformed.
That's a really insightful point. Medjugorje, in a way, it makes us reconsider what we mean by proof in matters of faith. Is it about, like, scientific evidence, or is it about seeing the tangible impact on people's lives?
Maybe both, or maybe it's about something even bigger than that, something we can't fully grasp.
It's really thought-provoking. It's almost like saying, look, believe in the apparitions or not, you can't deny the positive stuff that's happening.
And that seems to be a big part of the Vatican's message, and what Cardinal Fernandez is saying too. Let's not get bogged down in arguing about the supernatural. Let's look at the real, tangible good that's coming out of this.
Yeah, they're both saying, look at the good, look at the people.
It's an interesting way to approach it.
It is.
Now, I'm curious about the Vegenti, the visionaries, the people at the center of it all.
Oh, their lives, their stories are fascinating.
I bet.
And honestly, pretty messy, too.
They've been under a microscope for, what, over 40 years? That's got to be tough.
Yeah, everything they say and do is analyzed.
Imagine that. To have your life basically become this global phenomenon, especially when it all started when they were just teenagers.
And of course, there have been controversies. They're human beings.
Right, not saints.
The document even says that they didn't really have proper guidance at the beginning, plus all the pressure from different groups. It's intense.
It's a good reminder that even when these crazy things are happening, you know, these are just people. They make mistakes. They have their own struggles. They're shaped by what they go through.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean what they're experiencing isn't real, but it does add another layer to the whole thing.
It definitely complicates things.
Yeah.
And that's where discernment comes in. We can't just believe everything the Vegenti say, but we can't dismiss them entirely either. It's about seeking the truth while remembering that we're all human, we all have limits.
And the thing is, the church's decision, that Nihil Obstat, it's not about them as individuals.
Right. It's not about making them saints.
It's about the impact of Medjugorje itself, the place, what's happening there.
Exactly.
So we have this place where people say good things are happening. We have these messages that some theologians question. And we have these people, the Vegenti, who are far from perfect. It's quite a puzzle.
It is a real paradox. But maybe that's part of what faith is all about. Grappling with these kinds of mysteries, with experiences that don't fit neatly into our boxes.
It's a reminder that faith isn't always neat and tidy, and that's okay. Maybe it's even necessary.
Maybe it is. Medjugorje pushes us to think about how we approach experiences that defy easy categorization. Can good come from sources that we might question?
Big questions. It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I think it's a conversation worth having.
Definitely. Medjugorje challenges us to grapple with the messiness of faith and lived experience. It urges us to look beyond the surface and consider the bigger picture, the impact it's having on people's lives.
And I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, lots to digest.
We've got a lot more to unpack, so make sure you join us for part 2 of our Medjugorje depth dive.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is, and it makes you think about those visionaries, the Vegenti as they're called, and what their lives must be like.
Oh, absolutely. Their whole lives have been shaped by this experience.
Imagine being a teenager and suddenly you're claiming to see the Virgin Mary. It's worldwide news. It's got to be a lot to process.
Yeah, and that document we were talking about, it hints at how much pressure they were under. Think about it. Millions of people looking to you for guidance, for answers, for confirmation of their own beliefs. That's a heavy burden to carry.
And then there's the scrutiny. People questioning their motives, accusing them of lying or making things up. It's got to be tough.
It is, and that's why it's so important that the Vatican made it clear, that they're not saints, that they're just people. They make mistakes. They're not perfect.
Right, they're human.
It helps to, prevent this idea of worshiping them or something.
Yeah.
It keeps the focus where it should be, on God, on the message, not on the messengers.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those spiritual fruits we were talking about, all those stories of people's lives changing for the better. Even if you set aside the controversy around the visionaries, you can't deny that something powerful is happening there.
Absolutely. The conversions, the healings, the people who find peace and return to the church, it's remarkable.
It really is. And a lot of these people, they haven't even met the visionaries, right?
Yeah, it's like the place itself has an effect on people, regardless of whether they believe in the apparitions or not.
Almost like the atmosphere is charged with something, some kind of spiritual energy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think it speaks to the idea that there might be multiple layers at play here. Maybe the apparitions are one level, but then there's the impact of the place itself, the community, the opportunity for prayer and reflection. All of those things can be incredibly powerful.
It's making me think, you know how we always try to categorize things? Real or fake, true or false. Maybe that doesn't work with Medjugorje. Maybe it's both. Or maybe it's something else entirely.
That's what I find so fascinating about it. It resists easy categorization. It makes you question your assumptions, confront the limits of what you think you know.
And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that discomfort, that uncertainty is what pushes us to grow spiritually.
Maybe it's necessary. It forces us to acknowledge that there are things in this world that we don't understand, mysteries that we may never fully grasp.
That's a humbling thought. But it's also kind of liberating, isn't it? To admit that we don't have all the answers, to be open to the mystery.
It is. And that openness, that willingness to embrace the unknown,
Hmm.
maybe that's the greatest gift that Medjugorje offers.
Wow, I like that. It's about approaching the world with curiosity, with a sense of wonder, not clinging to our need for certainty.
Exactly. It's about allowing ourselves to be surprised, to be transformed by what we encounter, even if it doesn't fit into our preconceived notions.
So, for those listening, if Medjugorje has piqued your interest, if it's sparked some questions in your mind, maybe that's the invitation. To explore further, to see where this path leads.
You never know. It might lead you to your own encounter with the Queen of Peace.
Now, speaking of that journey of faith, there's this idea of discernment that keeps coming up. We've mentioned it in relation to the visionaries, the messages, even the Vatican stance. But what does discernment actually mean, especially for those who might not be familiar with the term?
Discernment is essentially about trying to figure out what God wants for our lives, not just following our own desires or impulses. It's about listening for that inner voice, that guidance from the Holy Spirit.
So it's about paying attention, being mindful, and making choices that are aligned with our values, our beliefs, our sense of what God is calling us to do.
Right? It's about being thoughtful and prayerful in our decision-making. It's not just about passively waiting for a sign, but actively seeking guidance, praying about things, and looking for confirmation.
And in the context of Medjugorje, discernment becomes even more important.
Absolutely. Because there's so much that's unknown, so much controversy, it's not a clear-cut case. So it's crucial to approach it with a sense of humility, being cautious about blindly accepting everything you hear, but also not rejecting it outright without considering all the angles.
I think the Vatican's approach to Medjugorje is a good example of discernment in action. They haven't said yes to the apparitions, but they haven't said no either.
It's a middle path, a recognition that there's something good happening, but also a need for caution, for further investigation.
So for someone who's drawn to Medjugorje, discernment might involve asking themselves some tough questions. What am I seeking here? Why am I drawn to this? Does it fit with my faith?
Exactly. And it might also involve talking to a spiritual advisor, someone you trust, who can help you make sense of it all and make wise choices.
Discernment isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
It is. It's something we do throughout our lives as we encounter new challenges, new information, new experiences that shape our understanding of ourselves and our relationship with God.
And it takes courage, right?
Oh, absolutely. Courage to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and humility to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers.
So as we continue to explore Medjugorje, I hope our listeners will keep that in mind, that spirit of discernment, being open to the possibilities, but also being grounded in reason, in the teachings of the Church.
Yes, discernment is key. The goal is to draw closer to God, to figure out His plan for our lives, and to find that sense of peace and fulfillment that we all long for.
And maybe, just maybe, in the midst of all the mystery and controversy of Medjugorje, we can find ourselves drawn closer to God, not through having all the answers, but through that process of seeking, of questioning, of surrendering to the unknown.
It's a beautiful thought, that surrendering to the unknown.
It is. Now, let's zoom out for a bit and consider Medjugorje in a wider context. How does this story fit into the whole history of Marian apparitions? Because this isn't the first time people have claimed to see Mary, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Sure.
Medjugorje is part of a long line of Marian apparitions going back centuries all over the world.
And the church has a whole system for dealing with these kinds of claims, right?
Yeah, it's a complex process. Some apparitions, like Lourdes and Fatima, they've been officially recognized by the church. Others have been rejected, and some are still being investigated.
It's like a spiritual investigation.
It is. They weigh the evidence, they look at the messages, they consider the fruits, those positive changes we've been talking about. It's a long and careful process.
And it seems like Medjugorje is in this kind of gray area, right?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It hasn't been officially recognized, but it hasn't been condemned either. It's what they call pastorally tolerated. The church sees the good things happening, but they're not ready to say it's definitely supernatural.
So what's a Catholic supposed to do? How do they make sense of this, especially when the church hasn't given a clear yes or no?
Well, it comes back to discernment again. The church encourages people to use both faith and reason. Listen to your heart, but also think critically. Seek guidance from the church. Be careful about just accepting things blindly.
It's not about blind faith, but it's also not about dismissing everything as a hoax.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Being open to the possibility of the supernatural, but also recognizing that we're human, we can misinterpret things, we can be fooled.
And the church also stresses looking at the fruits, the good that comes out of it. Conversions, people becoming more devout, doing good works in the world. Those are signs that something positive is happening.
It's like saying, if something is producing good fruit, there must be something good at its root.
And at the end of the day, Mary's role is to lead us to Christ, not to be the focus of our worship.
Exactly. Marian apparitions, when approached with discernment, they can deepen our faith, but they should never replace the gospel, the teachings of the church.
So it seems Medjugorje is a kind of test case, a really interesting example of how the church is navigating these complex questions of faith, human experience, and the possibility of the supernatural.
It is, and it's a story that's still being written. It forces us to grapple with the mysteries of faith and the enduring power of Mary in the lives of believers.
Speaking of Mary, I think it's time we talk about her role in all of this. The Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, the Queen of Peace.
Ah, Mary. She's such a central figure in Catholicism, but often misunderstood, especially by those outside the faith.
People might assume Catholics worship her, which isn't the case at all.
Right. We don't worship Mary, we venerate her. Catholic teaching is clear. Mary's role is to point us towards Christ, to be an example of faith and obedience, and to intercede for us with her Son.
And that understanding of Mary is key to understanding Medjugorje and other Marian apparitions. These events, whether you believe in them or not, are ultimately about getting closer to God.
That's a crucial point. It's not about elevating Mary to a divine status. It's about her role as a bridge, a guide, a motherly figure who leads us to her Son.
And the title Queen of Peace, which is so central to Medjugorje, it really resonates with that idea.
Absolutely. It speaks to Mary's role as a peacemaker, someone who helps us find peace within ourselves, in our relationships, and in the world around us.
And that message of peace, it's something that transcends religion, isn't it? We all long for peace.
It's a universal desire. And Mary, as the Queen of Peace, embodies that longing, offering us hope and comfort in a world that's often filled with conflict and chaos.
But there's also that image of Mary as queen, which evokes power, authority. How do we reconcile that with her being a humble servant of God?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of Marian theology. We see Mary as both humble and powerful. She's submitted to God's will, but she also holds a unique position as the Mother of God. She's both human and, in a sense, elevated beyond humanity because of her relationship with Christ.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
It is, but paradoxes are often at the heart of faith. Maybe that's part of what makes Mary such a compelling figure. She embodies both the human and the divine, the ordinary and the extraordinary.
And maybe that's why she continues to inspire people across cultures and centuries. She represents the possibility of transformation, of transcendence.
Of being touched by grace, by something bigger than ourselves.
And maybe that's what draws people to Medjugorje, this desire for a glimpse of that grace, of that divine presence that Mary represents.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
And it speaks to that deep human need to connect with something beyond ourselves, to seek meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel empty and meaningless.
Now let's talk about those spiritual fruits again. We've mentioned them throughout our conversation, but I think they deserve a deeper dive. They're such a central part of the Medjugorje story, especially when you consider the church's decision to allow pilgrimages.
Yeah, the spiritual fruits are fascinating. They're like this counterpoint to all the controversy and uncertainty. Even people who are skeptical about the apparitions themselves often acknowledge the positive changes that people report experiencing after visiting Medjugorje.
It's like saying you can debate the source, but you can't deny the impact.
Exactly. And the impact is undeniable. There are countless stories of conversions, healings, profound spiritual experiences, people finding peace, reuniting with their families, rediscovering their faith. It's hard to ignore those kinds of testimonies.
It's not just anecdotal either. There are documented cases, people who have been through incredible transformations that they attribute to Medjugorje.
And the church takes those accounts very seriously. They recognize that the fruits of something, the positive outcomes, can be a sign of its authenticity.
It's like saying, if something is producing good fruit, there must be something good at its root.
Exactly. And in the case of Medjugorje, the good fruit seems to be abundant. People finding peace after years of turmoil, broken families being restored, people turning their lives around and dedicating themselves to serving others. It's powerful stuff.
It's like Medjugorje offers a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in a world that often feels broken and divided, there are still places, moments, and encounters that can awaken us to the beauty and the transformative power of faith.
And those encounters often manifest in the form of those spiritual fruits we've been talking about. People report feeling a profound sense of peace, a newfound purpose, and a deeper connection to God.
Almost like a spiritual awakening, a shift in perspective that leads to a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And that's what's so intriguing about Medjugorje, isn't it? It challenges us to reconsider what constitutes proof, to look beyond the need for concrete evidence, and consider the transformative impact on people's lives.
Maybe the proof is in the pudding, as they say.
Maybe so. And those who are drawn to Medjugorje, who experience these transformations, they often say that the power comes from Mary herself, the Queen of Peace, interceding for them, drawing them closer to God.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it? Personal conversions leading to social transformation, inner peace, contributing to peace in the world.
Now, that's a powerful message, one that resonates with the core of many spiritual traditions. We're all interconnected, and our actions have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves.
So even amidst the controversies, the evidence of these spiritual fruits can't be ignored. They offer a compelling counterargument to the skeptics, reminding us that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in theological arguments or scientific proofs, but in the lived experiences of those who have encountered something extraordinary.
It's about being open to the possibility that God can work in mysterious ways, that grace can show up in unexpected places.
And that's a good reminder for all of us, regardless of our beliefs or our doubts.
It is. It's a call to humility, to curiosity, to a willingness to look beyond the surface and see what's really going on in the hearts of people.
Now, speaking of those who have been touched by Medjugorje, I think it's time we talk about the community itself, the people who have made this place their home, who have built a life around this phenomenon.
That's a great idea. We've talked a lot about the visionaries, the messages, the theological debates, but it's important to remember that there's a whole community of people who have been drawn to Medjugorje, who believe in its power, and who have dedicated their lives to sharing its message with the world.
And that community, I imagine, is just as diverse and complex as the phenomenon itself. You have people who have experienced incredible conversions, people who have found healing and comfort, people who are searching for answers, and people who are simply intrigued by the mystery.
Exactly. It's a real mix of personalities and motivations, all drawn together by this shared belief in the power of Medjugorje, however they choose to define that power.
It's a microcosm of humanity, united by this common thread of faith.
It is. And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. It's a reminder that faith isn't some monolithic thing, but a living, breathing reality that manifests in countless ways.
So let's delve into this community. What motivates them? What do they believe? How has Medjugorje impacted their lives?
Let's do it. But let's approach it with a sense of respect and understanding, remembering that their stories, no matter how unusual they might seem, are reflections of the human heart's longing for meaning, for connection, and for a glimpse of the divine.
That's a great point. Let's start by looking at their motivations. What are people seeking when they go to Medjugorje? What are their hopes and expectations?
Well, some people are drawn by a desire for healing. They've heard about the miracles, the stories of people being cured of illnesses or finding peace after years of struggle, and they're hoping for a similar experience.
I can understand that. When you're facing a difficult situation, you're willing to try anything, to reach out for any glimmer of hope.
Absolutely. And for some, that hope is found in Medjugorje. Whether it's a physical healing, an emotional healing, or a spiritual healing, They're seeking something that can mend the broken parts of their lives.
And for others, it's about seeking answers. Maybe they're wrestling with doubt, questioning their faith, trying to make sense of life's big questions.
Yeah, and the idea of a direct message from the divine, from Mary herself, that can be very appealing. It offers a sense of certainty, of guidance, in a world that often feels confusing and uncertain.
And then there are those who are simply drawn to the mystery, to the allure of the unknown. They've heard the stories, the rumors, the whispers of miracles and apparitions, and they're curious. They want to experience it for themselves.
It's like a spiritual adventure, a pilgrimage into the heart of the unknown.
It's fascinating how all these different motivations converge in Medjugorje. It's like a spiritual crossroads, a place where people from all walks of life, with different backgrounds and beliefs, come together seeking something more.
And that's what makes the community so unique. It's not a homogeneous group. It's a tapestry of individuals, woven together by this shared belief in the power of Medjugorje, however they choose to interpret that power.
It's like a living embodiment of the diversity of faith, of the many paths that lead to the divine.
Exactly. And that diversity is reflected in the ways that people experience Medjugorje. For some, it's a profound conversion experience, a sudden shift in perspective that leads to a renewed sense of faith and purpose.
It's like a spiritual awakening, a moment of clarity that changes everything.
And for others, it's a more gradual process, a deepening of their existing faith, a sense of peace and connection that grows over time as they immerse themselves in the atmosphere of prayer and devotion.
And for some, it's about the healing they experience, whether it's a physical healing, an emotional healing, or a spiritual healing that mends the broken pieces of their lives.
In all of these experiences, however we choose to interpret them, they often lead to a deeper sense of connection, both with God and with the community of believers who share their faith.
It's like a chain reaction, a ripple effect that spreads outwards, creating bonds of love, support, and shared purpose.
Those bonds, those relationships, they become a source of strength and inspiration, helping people to face life's challenges and to grow in their faith.
It's a reminder that faith isn't meant to be a solitary pursuit. It's about community, about sharing our journey with others who understand and support us.
And the community of Medjugorje is a beautiful example of that. They've created a space where people from all walks of life can come together, share their experiences, and support each other on their spiritual journeys.
It's a community that embraces diversity, welcomes questions, and offers a place for healing, growth, and transformation.
And it's a community that has faced its share of challenges, of criticisms, and controversies. But they've weathered those storms and emerged stronger, more united, and more committed to sharing their message of peace, hope, and reconciliation with the world.
And that message, I think, is one that transcends religious boundaries. It's a message that speaks to our deepest longings, our yearning for meaning, for connection, and for a world where love and peace prevail.
It does. And as we wrap up this part of our conversation, I encourage our listeners to reflect on that message, on the power of community, on the transformative nature of shared experiences, and on the enduring hope that faith offers in a world that often feels fragmented and uncertain.
It's a reminder that we're not alone on this journey, that there are others who share our struggles, our hopes, and our aspirations, and that in those moments of connection, of shared purpose, we find the strength to face our challenges, to embrace our vulnerabilities, and to step forward into the unknown with courage and grace.
Beautifully said. Now, I think it's important to address the other side of the coin, the challenges and criticisms that have been leveled at Medjugorje.
Yeah, we can't just focus on the positive stories and the inspiring testimonies. We have to acknowledge that there are skeptics, that there are controversies, that there are people who believe this whole thing is a hoax.
It's crucial to have a balanced perspective, to understand the criticisms, to grapple with the complexities, and to approach this phenomenon with a critical eye.
So let's dive into those criticisms. What are some of the main concerns that people have raised about Medjugorje?
Well, one of the most common criticisms is the lack of definitive proof for the apparitions. After all these years, over 4 decades, there's still no irrefutable evidence that the Vagenti are actually seeing the Virgin Mary.
And that lack of concrete proof fuels skepticism. Critics say, show me the evidence. If this is real, where's the proof?
Right, and they argue that the visions could be psychological, just a product of the Vagenti's imaginations or a misinterpretation of something else.
Or even a deliberate fabrication. Some people believe it's a big con.
And to be fair, the Church itself has been cautious. They haven't officially recognized the apparitions, although they've allowed for pilgrimages and public devotion. That Nihil Obstat from the Vatican, it's not a declaration of authenticity.
It's more like, we're not sure yet, but we're not going to stop people from going there and praying.
Exactly. It's a nuanced stance that acknowledges the positive impact while also recognizing the need for further investigation and discernment.
Now, another criticism focuses on the inconsistencies in the visionaries' stories over the years. Their accounts of the apparitions, the messages, even their personal lives haven't always been consistent.
And those inconsistencies have been a major point of contention for critics. They say if these apparitions were real, their stories would be perfectly aligned, there wouldn't be any contradictions.
But those who believe in Medjugorje often say that those inconsistencies are just proof that the visionaries are human. They're not saints, they're not perfect, they make mistakes, and their memories aren't flawless.
It's a valid point. Human memory is a fickle thing. We all filter our experiences through our own perceptions and biases, and over time, details can get muddled, especially with something as emotionally charged as a claimed apparition.
But regardless of the explanation, those discrepancies do fuel doubt and controversy, making it harder to discern what's true and what's not.
And that's where discernment comes in. It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting the claims. It's about looking at them critically, weighing the evidence, considering the context, and seeking guidance from the church.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the commercialization of Medjugorje. Over the years, it's become a major pilgrimage destination, attracting millions of visitors every year.
And that has led to a boom in tourism. You've got hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, all sorts of businesses popping up to cater to the crowds.
And for some critics, this is a huge problem. They say it cheapens the spirituality of the place, turns it into a money-making scheme.
Yeah, they point to the souvenir shops, the overpriced religious items, the whole touristy vibe. It can feel like faith is being commodified.
And those concerns are valid. When faith and money mix, there's always a risk of exploitation.
But those who defend Medjugorje say that the commercial aspect is just a natural consequence of its popularity as a pilgrimage site. The town relies on tourism for its economy, and many of those businesses are owned by local families who are just trying to make a living.
It's a complex issue, for sure. But it's a reminder that faith often plays out in messy, real-world contexts, where spiritual aspirations and economic realities collide.
Exactly. And it's a constant challenge to find that balance, to make sure that the desire for profit doesn't overshadow the pursuit of spiritual truth.
Another criticism that's often raised is that there's too much focus on the visionaries themselves.
Critics argue that the attention should be on God, on Christ, on the teachings of the church, not on the individuals who claim to be receiving these messages.
It's like they're worried about creating a cult of personality around the Vigenti, which could detract from the true object of Catholic faith.
And those concerns are understandable. The church has always been cautious about elevating individuals to a position of authority that might compete with the authority of Christ and the teachings of the church.
But those who believe in Medjugorje say that the visionaries are just instruments, channels through which Mary's messages are communicated to the world.
They say that the focus isn't on the Vigenti themselves, but on the messages, the calls for peace, conversion, prayer, and a deeper relationship with God.
And they point out that the visionaries have repeatedly said that they don't want to be the center of attention, that their role is simply to guide people towards Christ.
It's a tricky situation, for sure. It requires careful discernment, recognizing the human element in all of this, while also remaining open to the possibility that God might work through imperfect people.
So as we've seen, the criticisms leveled at Medjugorje are multifaceted. They raise important questions about faith, human psychology, the potential for both genuine spiritual experiences and for misinterpretations and manipulation.
And grappling with those questions is important. It challenges us to think critically, to examine our own beliefs, and to seek truth with an open mind and a discerning heart.
And ultimately, the decision of whether or not to believe in Medjugorje is a personal one, guided by individual conscience and a relationship with God.
It's a journey of faith, a quest for meaning, a search for that divine presence that can sometimes feel elusive in a world that's often confusing and chaotic.
Maybe the journey itself is the point. The seeking, the questioning, the wrestling with doubt. That's where we often grow the most.
It's about staying open to the mystery, embracing the unknown, and trusting that God is leading us, even when we don't fully understand the path.
Now, there's another aspect of Medjugorje that I think is particularly interesting. The role of the Franciscan priests.
Yes, the Franciscans. They've been deeply involved in Medjugorje from the beginning. and their story is intertwined with all the controversies and the spiritual fervor surrounding the apparitions.
We've touched on the tension between the Franciscans and the local bishop, but I think it's worth delving a bit deeper to understand the complexities of their involvement and the impact it's had on the Medjugorje phenomenon.
It's a fascinating story that reveals a lot about the human dynamics within the church, the challenges of dealing with extraordinary claims, and the tensions between different approaches to faith and authority.
Now, the Franciscans have a long and rich history in the Catholic Church. They're known for their commitment to poverty, service, and a deep spirituality that's rooted in the life and teachings of St. Francis of Assisi.
They're often seen as the more mystical, more experiential branch of the church.
And in the context of Medjugorje, their presence has been both a blessing and a source of conflict.
They were among the first to believe in the apparitions. They offered guidance to the visionaries, welcomed the pilgrims, and helped to create that atmosphere of faith and devotion that surrounds Medjugorje.
But their embrace of the apparitions and their support of the pilgrims put them at odds with the local bishop, who was more skeptical and cautious.
It created this tension between a more grassroots, experiential approach to faith, represented by the Franciscans, and a more institutional, hierarchical approach, represented by the bishop.
The Franciscans were focused on the immediate experiences of the people, the conversions, the healings, the spiritual fruits.
While the bishop was concerned about maintaining order, upholding church teachings, and protecting the faithful from potential harm or manipulation.
And that conflict escalated over the years, with the Franciscans defending the visionaries and promoting the pilgrimages, and the bishop expressing his doubts and concerns.
It was a clash of personalities, of theological perspectives, of different ways of understanding and approaching the divine.
And unfortunately, that conflict continues to this day, adding another layer of complexity to the already intricate tapestry of Medjugorje.
It's a reminder that the church is not a monolithic entity, that there are diverse viewpoints and approaches within Catholicism.
And that diversity, while sometimes leading to conflict, can also enrich the church, pushing it to engage with new experiences, to grapple with difficult questions, and to find ways to accompany the faithful on their unique spiritual journeys.
Now, the Vatican has attempted to address the situation by appointing a special envoy to oversee the pastoral care of pilgrims in Medjugorje.
It's an effort to assert more control, to ensure that Medjugorje remains a place of genuine spiritual renewal, while also navigating the sensitivities and the historical tensions.
It's a delicate balancing act, and one that's likely to continue for years to come.
But despite the controversies, the Franciscan presence in Medjugorje has undoubtedly had a profound impact on the phenomenon. They helped to shape its identity, its focus on personal experience, and its appeal to those seeking a more mystical and experiential expression of faith.
And I think it's a reminder that the journey of faith, the search for truth, is rarely a straight line. It's a winding road, filled with detours, obstacles, and unexpected encounters.
And it's often in those moments of uncertainty, when we're forced to confront the complexities and contradictions, that our faith deepens, and we discover the true meaning of surrender and trust in God's plan.
It's about letting go of our need for control, for certainty, and embracing the mystery of the journey.
Now, let's look ahead. Now that the Vatican has issued that Nihil Obstat, allowing for organized pilgrimages and public devotion to Mary, Queen of Peace, what can we expect to see in the future of Medjugorje?
That's the big question, isn't it? How will this phenomenon evolve now that the church has taken a more active role?
Well, one possibility is that we'll see a surge in pilgrimages. Now that the Vatican has given its blessing, more dioceses and parishes might feel comfortable organizing official trips to Medjugorje, opening the doors for larger groups of Catholics to experience the place.
And that increased traffic could lead to more infrastructure development. Larger churches, more hotels, better facilities to accommodate the growing number of pilgrims.
But that development will need to be managed carefully, right? To make sure that the spiritual heart of Medjugorje isn't lost in the midst of all the expansion.
Absolutely, it's a delicate balance. Preserving the sacredness of the site while also meeting the practical needs of the pilgrims will be a major challenge.
It's like walking a tightrope. You want to make it accessible to people, but you don't want to lose the essence of what makes Medjugorje special.
Exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how the Vatican's involvement shapes the future of Medjugorje. Will they take a more hands-on approach, or will they allow the Franciscans to continue playing a leading role?
It makes you wonder how the Franciscans will navigate this new chapter. Will they continue to assert their own interpretation of Medjugorje, or will they find ways to work more collaboratively with the Vatican's appointed visitor?
It's a dynamic that will be fascinating to observe. The Franciscans have been so integral to Medjugorje's identity, but the Vatican's involvement signals a shift in the balance of power.
Maybe this will lead to a more unified approach, a blending of the Franciscan tradition and the Vatican's authority, working together for the good of the pilgrims and the integrity of the message.
That would be ideal. But it's also possible that it could create new tensions, as different perspectives and priorities come into play. Only time will tell how this delicate dance will unfold.
And speaking of time, there's another element to consider. The Vigenti. They've been at the center of this story for over 4 decades. What happens to them now?
That's a really good question. Their lives have been so intertwined with the apparitions. Will they continue to receive messages? Will their testimonies change? How will they fit into this new chapter where the Vatican is taking a more active role? It's hard to say.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. And how will the church handle their presence moving forward? They're still deeply respected by many pilgrims, but there are also those concerns about potential manipulation or creating an unhealthy focus on them as individuals.
It's a delicate situation. The churches emphasize that they're not saints, that they're human, fallible. But their experiences are woven into the Medjugorje story. It's hard to separate the two.
They almost embody the unresolved questions surrounding Medjugorje, the ongoing mystery, the things we still don't know.
They represent both the human and the potentially divine aspects, the controversial and the inspiring, the confusing and the transformative. It's all there, wrapped up in their lives.
So it seems like the future of Medjugorje depends, in part, on figuring out how to incorporate the Vigenti moving forward, honoring their experiences while also protecting the integrity of church teachings and the pastoral care of pilgrims.
It's a challenge that needs careful consideration. Balancing those different aspects won't be easy.
We've covered a lot of ground today. The history, the controversies, the spiritual fruits, the messages, the Vigenti, the Vatican's position, the role of the Franciscans. It's overwhelming in a way.
It is. Medjugorje is more than just a place. It's a story, a mystery, a tapestry, woven from human experiences of faith, doubt, hope, and longing. It's all there.
And it's a story that's still unfolding. It makes you think about life's big questions, about the nature of faith, about the possibility of something bigger than ourselves breaking into our world in ways we don't expect.
It reminds us that faith, true faith, is rarely simple or straightforward. It's about embracing the detours, the challenges, the uncertainties. That's where we often grow the most, where our faith deepens.
It's about surrendering to the mystery, trusting that God is guiding us even when we can't see the whole path ahead.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Medjugorje, I find myself with more questions than answers. But maybe that's the whole point.
Maybe the real gift of Medjugorje isn't about finding definitive answers, but about being willing to explore, to question, to wrestle with the mysteries, and to let ourselves be changed by what we discover along the way.
Even if we never get all the answers we're looking for, that journey itself can be transformative.
It's a reminder that faith is a journey, not a destination. And sometimes the most important truths are found not in certainty, but in embracing the unknown, in letting go of our need to control everything.
I think that's a powerful message for anyone listening. If you're feeling that tug of curiosity, that sense of questioning, maybe this is an invitation to explore further, to delve into the mystery of Medjugorje and see where it leads you.
It's not a journey for everyone, that's for sure. But for some, it could be the start of something truly life-changing. Who knows? It might lead you to your own personal encounter with the Queen of Peace.
And even if you never physically go to Medjugorje, I hope this deep dive has at least planted a seed. A reminder that the divine can work in mysterious ways, that grace can show up in the most unexpected places, and that faith often involves embracing the unknown, the things we don't fully understand.
So there you have it, our deep dive into Medjugorje. It's a complex, fascinating, and often challenging story.
It is.
But it's a story that ultimately points us towards something bigger than ourselves, something that calls us to seek deeper, to question more, and to be open to the possibility of encountering the divine in ways we never imagined.
Beautiful.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.